this is an area where you can think about this as a tool for what you want to do with your company. Maybe you're starting it, maybe you're growing it. It's obviously a piece. I guess the reason, or my reason for thinking very differently about it, is because it's very finite. So and to some degree, so is your operations cash flow, but it's very finite. So you take in cash because you've, let's say, borrowed it, or you've lent it to the company yourself, but the company has borrowed it some way through and financed it. So that you have that nest egg there that you need to do something with, but confusing it with the operations cash flow is deadly. It is a fast way to watch your bank account go down close to zero and then all of a sudden plummet, and you don't really know why. And really, you were looking the entire time at cash flow that had come in from financing, when it wasn't giving you a good take on sort of the way the health of your company, the managerial sort of side of the accounting. So that sort of, I guess, brings me to my one of my sort of pet peeve, one of my red flags, I guess, is if a company is operating from a financial sort of accounting and decision-making perspective by looking at the bank account, you're in big trouble. Now, as you're starting up, that may likely be the case, that you're looking at your bank account to say, hey, is this check going to clear? Kind of, gives you a comfort feeling to some degree. But the red flag comes because you likely have significant liabilities, obviously depending on your particular industry or company or business model. You likely have significant liabilities that are sitting out there. So the cash that's in your bank account is not really representative of what you have. If you're looking at a burn rate, how many months you have to sort of survive before you become profitable. So managing a company based on logging into the bank account is very dangerous. Who has questions so far? Or thoughts? Who's had trouble with cash flow? That's a great question.
So even when you start, and I know we want to start thinking about cash flow early on, but what do you do when you're starting from basically nothing? Because a lot of us are, when we jump out there, I know my first 2 times trying to start a company, I didn't really have anything. And then the 3rd time I tried to start a company, I had something, but I think I was still operating like I had nothing and just ran out of everything that I had. But most of the people that I think that are generally starting now, it's just a dream that they have, and they don't really have any capital up front. So what do they do in that case?
Yeah, I think those are some great points. So the one thing you can always have is a budget. And if your budget, you can create a budget. Mm-hmm. So if your budget is $0, it's going to be challenging to have much financial management in general. So let's, for the sake of sort of conversation, let's assume you have some budget. Maybe it's $100, maybe it's $1,000, maybe it's as much money as you can make from your other job in the next 6 months, something like that. And you can sort of estimate those inflows of cash, which would be a financing source. So I think the budget is really where I would go to for somebody looking to start up. I would say, do not get hung up on the budget being perfect. Start with a budget. Get any budget down. I definitely used to get hung up on, I want to make sure, I want to get so granular in the detail that I'm looking for every source of, cost that could come through and trying to account for all of that. If you can do that, great, but don't get hung up on it. Create a budget and then sort of work from there. A budget can be sort of a living document. You can continue to update it and modify it as things become more real or more concrete, or you change your idea, you pivot to something else, whatever the case may be. So I would say in general, if you're starting from what feels like nothing, create something, which is a budget. Another thing that you sort of mentioned in the advent of your experience starting businesses is the idea, I guess, of acting like you're poor even when you're not. And from a cash flow standpoint, I think that's important, because and I have gotten lured into in the past thinking, hey, we're making good money. I'm watching the bank accounts increase, or the accounts in QuickBooks increase, and it seems like maybe it's a good time to make some other investments, or sort of take some responsibilities or some duties off of my shoulders by either outsourcing or hiring in. And I would encourage you to, as you may be you're probably not a very conservative person if you're starting a business, but I would encourage you to really try and pretend you're poor for as long as possible. It's going to help you down the road. Is everybody familiar with the term of like a burn rate for cash? Is anybody not, or maybe all? So a burn rate is sort of, because it's in general is an amount of money that you need to survive on a periodic basis, let's say a month, without any cash flow coming in, or with, let's say, your operations not sort of, maybe not being profitable. There's sort of different realms that people can operate under. But so it's if I've just started my company, my farming company, and I need to plant my fields and wait for it to grow and fertilize and whatever I do, and I'm planning on being able to harvest and sell my product in 6 months. Well, then I need to at least have a 6-month sort of burn rate of cash. Like each month, I still have to pay for this equipment. I still have to pay for this barn. I still have to, whatever. I still have to pay maybe for my living expenses if that's what I'm doing. So that would be a burn rate. Kind of thinking about that and establishing it as much as possible, I think, is also a great tool to think about, depending on, again, your industry. Some people who has an idea or has started a business that is profitable, or the operations are generating profit from day one. Interesting. That's more my experience, but there are a lot of people who look at investment to leverage sort of future profitability, and it's really important then that you establish a burn rate, because obviously at the day you open, you're headed to closing. You're going to burn the cash that you have eventually, assumedly. You don't have an infinite supply or a huge supply of cash. You're going to burn that. You're headed towards your closing. So understanding those parameters and looking at the bank account and saying, great, I've got $50,000, but I know my burn rate is $10,000 a month. I've got about 5 months to live. So it's pretty simple math, but it's I think critical to be aware of.
So how do you figure out what that budget is? Do you figure out what your expenses are going to be, and that's it, or do you say, I have $10,000 that I can put towards this? How do you determine how much cash you have to give towards something, or is it the opposite?
So what I would say would be that you establish an operations budget. Maybe we should be more specific. So as you operate, what will be the cash coming in, if any, and what will be the expenses going out? So income and outgoing, again, cash flow. Using a budget from a cash flow perspective and saying, I intend to, at least that's my hope, or I intend to, maybe not aspirational, but sort of whatever you think the real world most likely scenario is. I think I'm going to have this much money coming in, and I think I'm going to have this much going out, and sort of using that as a budget. And then, reviewing it somewhat, again, periodically, maybe monthly, and saying, was this realistic? Has my burn rate changed? Are we bringing in more money or less money, or do we have higher expenses or lower expenses? Yes.
I would also like to comment that in business, most entrepreneurs do not also consider their personal budget when it comes to coming up with the operations budget, because a lot of people who start business, they feed themselves off the revenue that comes in the business, and you have to be realistic and say, okay, the business has these many types of expenses, and I have to make sure that my break-even point is this. But also personally, I have to maintain my standard of living at this particular rate. So when you come up with those budgets, especially the burn rate, you have to also consider the personal side too. And I'd like to just add that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think so. Entrepreneurs, myself included, are frequently really excited to sort of quit their day job, and the longer you can wait to not do that, if you have a day job, the better. I mean, you will be. There's all sorts of rationalizations you can come up with. Hey, if I was working on this all full time, I could really be pushing it forward, and there may be large portions of that are true. But if your personal finances sink the business faster than the operations do, it's a bigger problem, So I think keeping your day job, if you have one, or whatever your source of income is, your sugar daddy, I think that's important to keep in perspective and not sort of talk yourself out of it. It should be really painful. You should be like, I'm up all hours of the night. I have basically 2 full-time jobs at this point, and I cannot physically do it, and we also have revenue coming in, so now I can quit my job. If you have 2 full-time jobs and you're spending 80, 90, 100 hours a week, one is paying you like your normal job, and the other one is not bringing in any cash, there's a problem, right? You're putting in, there's one thing if you're in sort of R&D or setup phase, but if you're starting to operate your business even, and you've got this sort of dichotomy, I think there's a potential that there may be a huge problem. You know, you're looking at something that you're spending a ton of time on and not able to see some cash flow from. Maybe it's part of the plan, but it's a hard world to live in.